Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for joining us once again at 24 Hours of Reality. And thank you all for joining us for hour 19. And we're going to start right away with a 19th reason for hope. Sometimes we get the impression that governments are not doing much, and some of them really aren't. But in response to demands from the public, there are quite a few countries that are well on their way to achieving ambitious emissions reductions goals, and that is a source of hope. There is so much more to do, but there are still many governments around the world who have yet to enact national carbon policies, and that is a true failure of leadership. That's undeniable. But momentum for climate change is growing, and it is a source of hope that a great many countries are beginning to do the right thing and are making genuine progress toward meeting their emissions reductions goals. And that is a source of hope, that many countries are indeed making such progress. Let's take a look at what the European Union is doing. The European Union has been a stalwart for the world in continuing to make bold commitments and, by and large, in meeting those commitments. The EU emissions trading system got off to kind of a rough start, and in the early period of their emissions trading system, they were justly criticized. They got some things wrong, but they made the adjustments and they kept going, and they've been really determined to do better. They now regulate more than 11,000 power stations and industrial plants in 31 countries, along with airlines. And Europe has pledged by 2030 to cut its emissions by 40% and to produce 27% of its energy from renewable sources. I believe they're going to exceed that second goal and maybe exceed the first goal because of all the other reasons for hope that we have already talked about in this segment, this year's 24 Hours of Reality. Greenhouse gas emissions in the EU are already down over 19% since 1990. That is genuine progress. That is a source of hope. Imagine what the situation would be like if we did not have positive examples like the EU. But it is not the only one. In Scotland, much in the news of late, an important referendum coming up, but look at Scotland's plans for climate. They have plans to produce 100% of all their power from renewable sources. That is another source of hope. In fact, if you look around the world at what happened last year, in the year 2013, 8 new carbon markets were launched last year alone. Another source of hope. There are some positive things happening, and that also means there are good, positive examples that other countries yet to act can build upon. They can learn from what's happened. They can use the success of these regions and countries that have made progress. So let's take a global view. What countries do already have carbon policies? Well, there are quite a few, but the one question mark that is most important is my country, the United States. But even in the United States, as we talked about in an earlier hour, President Obama has gone around the Congress by using legitimate legal authority that was given to the president in a previous Congress to regulate air pollution, and by defining global warming pollution as air pollution, and it clearly is. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on that matter, and the authorities used by President Obama are perfectly legal and constitutional. And using those authorities, he has instructed the Environmental Protection Agency to mandate significant emissions in global warming pollution from coal-fired power plants. But the reason for this question mark is that it's not enough, and most people are realizing that. And President Obama did try to get a national carbon policy at the beginning of his first term, but he was stymied by the United States Senate, even though the U.S. House of Representatives did enact it. So there is work to be done in the United States. I'm very optimistic and hopeful because President Obama is determined to get progress here. He's done some things I've disagreed with, but overall it's very clear that he is moving in the right direction on climate policy. And with public opinion changing, as we saw in a previous hour, there is now reason for hope that a national policy may be possible soon in the United States. The single largest source of global warming pollution in the world, of course, is China. But there is good news along with the bad news. China has now implemented a pilot carbon trading program in 5 cities and 2 regions, and significantly, China has announced that these pilot programs will serve as the basis for a nationwide cap and trade program as early as next year. It's even possible that the world might hear some new pledges from China next Tuesday at Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's special session of the United Nations to focus on climate. I certainly hope so. But these are not the only initiatives in China. As seen in an earlier hour, China has made the largest investments of any nation in renewable energy, fast trains, smart grids, renewable energy storage systems. And they have also announced a ban on new coal-fired power plants in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. Now, there is now a specific ban that will be put into effect on the burning of any coal use in Beijing. And it's important to understand that one of the reasons for this Chinese action has to do with the air pollution that is causing such problems in China, also causing the beginnings of some political turmoil and unrest. Here is the Beijing skyline on a clear day. Notice the outline of this building, and then look at the same building on a day where the air pollution is particularly bad. Similarly, here's another picture of Beijing a year ago, January, and 2 weeks later, when the air pollution reached an unacceptable level. Here is the Forbidden City, and look at what the air pollution from the burning of coal does to this vista. This is a view from a hotel room looking down on some of the modern structures in Beijing on February 4th, 2012. And then a year later, look at the impact of the coal burning pollution on that view. Now, of course, as we also saw in an earlier hour, this causes health problems and creates a tremendous opportunity to solve those health problems while reducing the global warming pollution that leads to the climate crisis. It's not only in Beijing. Other cities in China, Harbin in the northeast has some of the worst air pollution. Nanjing, where it's now routine for people in many China cities to wear these masks to protect themselves against the air pollution. And partly as a result, another new carbon policy initiative that China has announced this year is the requirement for thousands of companies all across China to report their greenhouse gas emissions so that the government can begin to collect the data that is necessary for this nationwide cap and trade program that they have told the world they are planning to implement. China's new president, Xi Jinping, has made many statements committing himself to leadership on this issue. This is only one where he says green and sustainable development represents the trend of our times. Interestingly, his first state visit as president was to the Maldives, a country famously known for being threatened by sea level rise because it's one of those low-lying island nations that is in danger of being overwhelmed by the sea level rise that accompanies the melting of West Antarctica and Greenland and the mountain glaciers. But regional governments and subnational governments have also joined 39 national government jurisdictions in all that have already implemented or are firmly scheduled to implement carbon pricing instruments. Again, imagine if we lived in a world where no nations were undertaking these kinds of initiatives. The fact that many have made these pledges and that many of them are meeting their goals is a source of hope, and we have seen genuine progress. Now, this is an interesting development. The E7 group, this is the emerging economies, have now reduced their emissions intensity for the first time by more than the reductions from the wealthy developed countries. Neither group has done very much, and much more progress is needed, but this is an historic change because the cartoon version of this crisis has separated developed rich countries from poor developing countries, and the image has been the developing countries are not doing anything, only the rich countries are. That picture is out of date. For the first time last year, the emerging economies made more progress than the developed economies. Now let's take a closer look at the United States. This is an extremely hopeful sign, even though there is not a national carbon policy in place. We are seeing an historic development. In the first half of this year, the majority of new energy generation came from renewables, the bulk of it from solar power, and close behind, wind power. No coal in the picture. When you look for new energy generation from coal, there is none. Natural gas prices have been going back up. Solar and wind are growing dramatically. So this is a real source of hope in the United States. 56% of new energy generation coming from renewables. A few years ago, if somebody had told you that would happen, you'd have to say, I don't believe it, it can't. But it is happening, and it is a powerful reason for hope. So when we look all around the world, yes, much more needs to be done. And we need a global agreement to be reached in Paris in December of 2015. But the very fact that so many nations are actually making genuine progress, and so many regional and subnational jurisdictions are doing the same, all of that adds up to a very powerful reason for hope, the 19th reason for hope.